Next, we have Bill Bogart. Bill is a retired distinguished university professor and professor of law at the University of Windsor. And I had a chance to hear Bill on CBC not too long ago speaking about decriminalization. And, we've been hearing about that experiment in BC. And just made me think, I made a note to myself. I think it was Tara talking about how, you have sometimes you have to adjust your program, your plan as it goes on. And it seems like that is obviously what's going on out there. So, Bill, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much for being here tonight, and floor is yours.
Thanks, Rob, for the invitation. So Rob asked me to talk about decriminalization and where we're at with it now in Canada. I've got 7 minutes, so this is very much a cook's tour. There'll be lots of detail left out, but happy to have comments from other panelists and comments and questions from everybody who's here. So what is it? It's basically an indication that individuals will not be charged criminally for possession and use of small amounts of drugs. How it differs from legalization is that decriminalization does not address the issues of supply. So individuals still have to access their drugs from the illicit market, with whatever negatives that may entail. Legalization, on the other hand, addresses both demand and supply so that individuals can possess and use a drug and access those drugs from a legal source. Think alcohol or more recently, cannabis. What are the goals of decriminalization? Well, the obvious ones that individuals will no longer be subject to criminal charges for only using drugs. This relieves them from the complications that are imposed by criminal record. It addresses, at least to some extent, discriminatory practices against those who have historically suffered these practices, including Blacks and Indigenous people. It frees up courts and police to concentrate on their resources on serious crimes. And very importantly, it encourages people who are dependent on drug use, noting the complications that Tara has talked about, to come forward to receive help in its many forms and varieties without fearing being charged with an offense. But again, to repeat the very important point, it's only one measure to address drug use, which is often linked to poverty, homelessness, mental health issues, etc. What are some of the experiences in other countries? Well, Portugal is the most famous example of decriminalization. Drugs were decriminalized in that country about 25 years ago. It's important to note that at the same time, public support for drug usage were significantly enhanced. As a result, the efforts on decriminalization were quite successful for some time, and that decriminalization in Portugal was studied intensely. Death and HIV infections fell. There was no great spike in use of drugs. Children were protected from use. Portugal did not become a haven for drug tourism. Lately, I think it's fair to say that the consequences of decriminalization have been less successful in that country. But that's for a number of reasons. Most prominently, the public health supports have decreased. That being said, rates of use in Portugal are still lower than the European average. Deaths from drug use are lower, etc. The other initiative for decriminalization that has gotten a lot of attention is the state of Oregon in the United States. That decriminalization was actually approved by the voters in a referendum. But it was controversial from the beginning for a number of reasons, one of which it was encased in a country where there are large, many vocal critics of any kind of harm reduction efforts. What happened in Oregon was a variety of things that happened, but one was a very significant pushback from use in public spaces and associated alleged antisocial behavior. Anyway, opposition to the decriminalization mounted, and so it's actually the law allowing for decriminalization has been repealed. As it was repealed, there was promises for more funding and resources for support for people who use drugs. We'll see how that all turns out. Now, BC has a pilot project going in on decriminalization. It's for a 3-year period. Permission was given from the federal government, but complicated, but the federal government basically has oversight of criminal issues around drug use. So federal support was necessary. The pilot project goes for 3 years. It was begun in January 2023, so we're basically halfway through. Again, it's being studied intensely regarding a number of issues. The project has been modified recently because of pushbacks regarding use in public spaces and accompanying disorderly and antisocial behavior, despite warnings from a number of sources that, look, this may cause more people to use alone. And as Tara has indicated, that can be very consequential in terms of overdoses, because then there's no one to help, and some more deaths can result. Let me speak just for a moment about Toronto. The City of Toronto had an application for decriminalization just for the city itself. But as part of the controversy around the BC pilot project and the modifications to it, Premier Ford recently announced his adamant opposition to decriminalization. And so without provincial support, the application can't proceed. But it's important to note that meanwhile, the Chief Medical Officer of Health in Ontario is on record as supporting decriminalization, as is the Chief of Police of Toronto. And statistics indicate that last year, Toronto Police arrested only about 15 people for simple drug possession. So if these stats continue to hold, we have a kind of decriminalization, in fact, going on in the City of Toronto, but without the adequate supports and safeguards.
Okay, so Billy, I was going to ask you on that last point, like sometimes people talk about a de facto decriminalization where police are not necessarily enforcing it, probably for a lot of reasons. I mean, we see it locally. You know, our police services locally and across the province are, overrun with a lot of work. And so do we need to push for decriminalization if we have de facto, like you said, Toronto with 15 charges for simple drug possession?
Hard to know where we're going with this, Rob. I mean, there might be one school of thought that says, yeah, let's just let it go under the radar, and people won't be charged. So that sort of first point I made about, well, people won't be then criminalized for simple drug possession and use, and for a number of reasons that would be a good thing. But I don't think then you're getting the other benefits, encouraging people to come forward, but in a public manner, saying, look, it's no longer an offense. So if you do need help, again, noting the complications that Tara has spoken about, come forward. There won't be any repercussions.
Right.
I think the other thing is, there probably was something of a mistake made in BC in terms of not clarifying this position about use in public spaces.
Right.
Now, what the clarification could be something to talk about. But if you just have de facto decriminalization, you don't have that conversation around, well, what are we going to do about use in public spaces? What could this possibly look like? If there's no antisocial behavior, maybe we could tolerate it. But that's a discussion that you're having when you actually acknowledge that decriminalization is taking place.
I think that's the really good point. If you actually decriminalize it, people then feel more at ease to talk about it. And, that whole stigma issue, raises itself, that causes a lot of problems for people. But by taking away that roadblock, sure, I got away with not being charged, but that doesn't mean I can just openly go about doing my business, because there's still the potential. Whereas if you aren't under that potential for charges, then seeking services, treatment, discussion will be more open. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I'm glad you touched on the BC issue, that the main point being the use in public spaces that they amended or altered as part of their ongoing and still in place pilot project.
I think that's a very important point to make. There's a lot of misinformation going on around here. Some people actually think the project has been collapsed, which clearly has not. It clearly is continuing.
Yeah, and it speaks to, I think it was in Tara's slide too, how you implement programs, and you're going to have to modify as they go. Not always going to get it right the first time. So, okay, thanks a lot, Bill.